Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to my podcast, Don't Get a Therapist Yet. And today I have a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Claire Plumbly, and she's a clinical psychologist. She is also an author of more than one book, but today we're talking about this amazing book she has written called Burnout. So a very warm welcome to you, Claire.
Thanks for having me, Wendy.
Could we start by just telling the listeners a little bit more about yourself? I mean, maybe why you became a psychologist and what it is you're up to nowadays.
So I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in Taunton in Somerset. I moved out of London in 2017 and set up private practice. Before that, I worked in the NHS in London. Why I became a psychologist? Well, I was one of the first year groups when psychology was an option as an A level, which was very exciting because I thought I was going to be able to read minds and it felt quite magical and exciting and new. And it was enjoyable. And it just felt like, I was in a family where my mum, as a nurse, was, in a helping profession. It just felt like a lovely opportunity to go into a helping profession that just felt like it had a slightly interesting kind of extra dynamic to it with understanding the human mind. And I think at home, as the eldest daughter as well, I was definitely the one who was the one who would fix things, sort things out when there were arguments or, disagreements. I seem to have that role in my family. So I think maybe I was drawn into that a little bit. Um, and had a legitimate reason to go in and support people once I was a qualified psychologist.
Excellent. Yes, yes. Great skills, very relevant for psychology. So that's really good. And the book you've written, I know you've written more than one. Uh,
Actually, I haven't. I've only written one, but I think the one you're referring to is the American version that has a different title.
oh,
So
yeah.
you
Okay.
might have seen two. So the British version is called Burnout: How to Manage Your Nervous System Before It Manages You, and the US version is called The Trauma of Burnout. It's a
Yes.
green, different color book.
Thank you for clarifying that because I did see that on Amazon and I thought, oh,
Mm,
how interesting. Okay, that's great. So this is for the UK, but if anybody is listening abroad, they might actually be able to get the American version as
yeah.
well. Yeah. And just curiously, what was it that made you write this book as well, Claire?
So yeah, and it's hard answering that because I felt quite sheepish. Like you never feel like you're ever qualified enough to write a book. I don't think. Oh, certainly I didn't. It was triggered a lot of imposter syndrome. But so there were books on burnout, and I kind of thought, is there room for one more? But essentially, there wasn't quite what I was looking for my own clients. Um, and the ones that were currently available were just written by people with a different background and training and models. And what I wanted was one that offered the trauma trained lens that I was trained in. Um, so yeah, I just felt that actually maybe there was room in the world for another book. Maybe I could offer some experience and expertise. Obviously, a lot of books will be written by researchers or people at the cutting edge of all the research, and so part of my imposter syndrome was, well, I'm not, but I'm a practicing clinician. But obviously, what people have really appreciated about the book is the practical nature of it and the case studies, because people usually see themselves in one of them, if not more. And so I'm making it really real and how to make techniques play out in an everyday busy life, not just stopping and like it's theory practice links very much in play, hopefully.
Yes, I found that reading it, I thought it had a lovely depth to the quality of reading. You could tell that you knew your stuff and you were you obviously did research it and everything like that. But the implementation and the practical steps that you have in the book, I think are very easy to follow and very relevant. And I think sometimes if you are focusing on a stressed stroke burnout population, they don't want to read, they want to read a book that's easy to follow, don't they? They don't want to read a highly theoretical, analytical book because it's overwhelming to them, they often feel overwhelmed. So I think you did a really good job at providing some really good, solid, practical
Thank you.
skills that people can follow. So
And the other thing to say about it is, first of all, it's available as an audiobook. So if anyone's like, I just don't even have capacity to read, that's important. And secondly, the format of the book is the format that you would follow in therapy. So it's about outlining what the problem might be, differentiating it from other potential problems like depression, anxiety. So the assessment phase, and then moving on to what we call in therapy formulation, which is the understanding about how do we get here? What are the contributing factors? And being, breaking that down into all the areas, not just one specific place like workplace stress.
mm,
Because in therapy, we never see someone with just one area and isolate that. We always think holistically, and then moving on to therapeutic support. And then afterwards, like post burnout growth, I
yeah.
call it. But what is important to say is that some of the techniques I'd seen in books, which are sensible techniques, were about saying no, boundaries, pacing. Those are all really important. But what I was finding was people kind of knew a lot of that and still couldn't implement it. And I wanted to explain what might be going on in the autonomic nervous system in your body when you get to a certain point, why stress stops us from that tending to oneself, which is complicated, but I wanted to try and get the main gists out there so people weren't just berating themselves and using it as another stick to beat themselves with, that other people can nail this and I'm the one failing.
It's so true, and I find because I'm a CBT therapist and EMDR therapist, and I love both those practices, and obviously I recognise a lot of your techniques in your
Yeah,
book. That's why I loved it so much. Um, But I think sometimes education is so good. I think it can help sort of calm the nervous system if people understand it's not their fault. This is how your system works. I think you did that really well, explaining
thanks.
that in a sort
Yeah.
of step-by-step process. It'd be, right, now I get that. Rather than sort of panic about what on earth is wrong with me. Why can't I think my way out of it? Is one of your comments, isn't it?
Mm.
So yes, I think that's a really good point. But I must admit, I did go straight to the skills section at the
Oh,
end.
did you? Right, okay.
I
Tell me
read
the
that first.
answers. Skip to the good parts. I like your honesty. Oh, it's nice that if you can dip into it like that, it's good to hear that that is also something that, people can do.
Yes, that's fine. Yes, so like you say, that there is a logical process to it, but I was just sort of interested in sort of reading bits here and there, which is great. Okay,
Mm.
yeah, you can do either. So, Claire, could you perhaps tell us a little bit more about what the difference between stress and burnout is, and how listeners can perhaps tell what are the differences?
Yeah. Um, so first of all, just to explain that stressors are the ones that are the demands coming in at
Yep.
us. Life is full of stressors. If you imagine like a weighing scale in front of you, when there are
Hmm.
too many stresses and demands coming in and we're not well resourced or we don't have enough support, the balance becomes tipped. And our body is designed to respond to stresses. We go into the stress response, which is the sympathetic part of the nervous system where we gear up for action. It's a mobilized, energized place
Hmm.
where we will kind of tackle things or avoid and get out of there as quickly as possible. But essentially, the human nervous system was designed for this to manage, but only in short doses. And the thing is, it puts a load on our system because our nervous system, our body is shifted into a different gear
Yeah.
for that moment. So these are called allostatic changes where your heartbeat increases and your breathing shifts in order to marry up with what the energy is needed in that moment to stay safe. Um, so if that goes on for too long, it starts to kind of weigh down on us and we start to get longer term changes to our body that are difficult in terms of our physiology. That's where stress related illnesses can start to flare up, for example, but also in terms of burnout. Um, Emotionally, we can start to give up and feel hopeless and helpless, and like nothing is going to change. So the kind of the quick rule of thumb is that stress is about engagement, and to a certain extent, sometimes we can get over engaged. Burnout is about disengagement, where we've tried and it's been inescapable, and so we've kind of curled up into a ball, and our brain, not deliberately, has kind of played its trump card, which is just to switch off from it, and we can become, detached from the emotions of caring, because it's just easier to not care. We can become cynical. We literally feel like we're on autopilot sometimes, going through the motions. You hear people say that.
Mm. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people can recognize that, and which is really good, isn't it? And recognizing the differences, that makes a lot of sense. Um, and you actually describe burnout as sort of like overwhelming your nervous system. Um, I mean, what does that look like on a sort of day-to-day basis? What would people expect to see?
Well, if you think about your nervous system being like gears that you would ideally
Hmm.
move up and down to self-regulate, so that if you've got something intense, you can then come back in the evening, for example, after it's over, to a sense of calm, able to engage with the program you're watching with your partner, or able to put the kids to bed and engage with reading time with them. But, quite often when there's been a lot going on and someone's nervous system is dysregulated and unable to do that, they'll get stuck in just the kind of either the frantic energy, high energy place of the sympathetic mode, or go tipping into that kind of really shut down place and finding it really hard to come back out into the green rest and digest place. So yeah, that's what I mean by that overwhelmed. It's struggling to move with fluidity up and down and knowing what you need and how to achieve that.
Mm. Sort of getting stuck in the system really, and not being able to sort of move on. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. And you make a really good point. I think it's on the back actually. People can't think their way out of burnout, can they?
Mm.
Can you just what do you mean by that exactly? Because that's really interesting.
So quite often when we're in that really dark place, our thoughts become very hopeless, and the nature of our thinking is in that threat-based, rather than being like approach the problem and fix, which we were in stress. Once we've started to detach and close down, which often happens in burnout, that kind of giving up and feeling hopeless thought processes take over. The quality of our thinking is not the same, so we can't so easily think through all the problems and the nuances of all the potential solutions. Creative thought is impacted. Our ability to think about what the steps would be to get from A to B is impacted. So, your nice frontal lobe thinking capacity is impaired essentially.
Mm.
And quite often in that place, the memory faculties that you've got access to is different. So we rely more on our procedural memory, which is a deeper part of the memory. I'm sure you talk about this as well sometimes with your EMDR clients. You know, it can be confusing to someone to be in burnout and still kind of functioning, getting through the day. But a lot of tasks, like making a cup of tea, for example, or driving, that's highly complex tasks. But because I've repeated them so often, I've delegated or outsourced them to my procedural memory. So I can do those without thinking, now I'm putting the kettle on, now I'm putting the tea bag in the cup, because I can multitask. And so though that bit of memory is not impacted by this. It's our thinking, learning, human part of the brain that is. So that's why it can be a bit masked. The main red flag for that is that maybe you're struggling to take on board the new procedures at work, or new person's name, or you're very thrown if there's roadworks on the way home and you can't go your usual route. These would be the signs that maybe you're relying on that kind of rote procedural memory rather than all of the parts of your brain.
Mm. And I mean, I can relate to that, and I'm sure I'm not in burnout, but I can relate to it. I'm sure loads of
Mm,
listeners can relate to that, where you just sort of, what's gone wrong with my brain? Why is it that I can't think clearly? Your brain can
yeah,
feel sort of like brain fog, I suppose, or mushy, or just unclear or confused, all those type of things. But it makes sense that, like you say, things that are like learnt automatic, they can do that bit, but
yeah,
they can't sort of
yeah,
problem solve or think clearly or learn new stuff, I think is what you're saying.
yeah. And it's not
Yeah.
permanent. It's important to highlight that this is temporary. It's just a current state, an emotional state that you're in. Um, and a lot of the task in therapy is often to sit with someone here. What are all the demands coming in? What are all the problems that we are facing that at the moment feel impossible, and you don't have the kind of thinking capacity to look at and consider? Because then we can begin to pull it all apart a little bit. And sometimes I say, let's riff off my frontal lobes for a bit. I'll loan you mine, and we'll think through together. And then the safety of connection and having the space held all starts to bring things more online, and gradually, that comes back. And so, yeah, we're looking for ways to feel safe again a lot of the time in therapy.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's really good, isn't it? That you obviously, as a therapist, you have to provide that sort of safe space for the person, isn't it? Because they, like you say, the overwhelm is so massive. But once they start to talk about the things that are really bothering them, that's sort of step one, I suppose, isn't it? In actually helping to understand better the problem. I think you said earlier, part of therapy is, what is the problem, and how do you understand the problem as well?
Mm.
It seems as that's a very important process. And I like the fact that you also say that it's a temporary thing. So people don't, again, people can catastrophize and go, I'm in burnout and that's it. I'm never going to get better, or I'm always going to be like this, or my brain's defunct. I like the way you said, no, this is a temporary state, and
Mm.
there are things you provide hope, really, don't you, for people?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really important.
Because I often have heard people say, "Do I have dementia now? Is this baby brain? Is this the menopause?" Like, I think those kind of questions. I mean, it's hard to untangle it all, because sometimes it's a bit of all of the above, and sometimes
Yeah.
those are extra pressures, not necessarily dementia, but those are extra pressures. If your hormones are out of kilter, that put internal stress on the body and need to be tended to. But I think if someone is asking themselves those questions, it might be worthwhile just thinking about,
Mm,
could the stress have got like too much? Have I been trapped in chronic stress for too long? Could this be tipping into burnout?
mm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah. Good. And I suppose also if there is any side factors, like if there's any kind of possible menopause concerns, a person can go and actually have that assessed as well, can't they? They can just,
Yeah,
it's good to be practical
definitely.
about
And
that.
I think, yeah, I would agree. And last year, well, a couple of years ago, started HRT, which obviously is one option. I would recommend, if you're going to GP, seeing if they've got a specialist clinic for that, because sometimes the GP, their knowledge of it can be hit and miss,
Mm,
whereas the nurse-led clinic, they're keeping up to date with all the research and information on it. So sometimes they are the best person to go to. So if you've got a big enough GP surgery where that's an option, I recommend that. But also just getting, your vitamin levels and iron levels all checked, because
mm,
that's something else that can be a little bit out of kilter. But holistically as well, thinking, are you getting enough vitamins, and are you eating a healthy diet? All of this has an impact, because if you don't have a happy, healthy gut, the gut is often referred to as the third brain, because it has,
mm,
the vagus nerve has lots of nerve endings in the gut area.
mm.
So it's important to think not just about stress, but what's going on inside your body.
Mm. It's very good to hear it from somebody like yourself as well, because I think sometimes if you are in burnout and you have lack of energy, doing anything is sort of like quite a lot of effort, isn't it? So, oh, I've got to go and get the
Yeah,
things checked. But if you provide that, again, very
yeah,
practical advice, and explain the reason why, like you said about the vagal nerve, people can understand it better,
yeah.
and hopefully will be motivated to go and make uh, have those checks done. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. Self-care is hard. It's hard to prioritize yourself when you've got
Yeah.
lots going on, when you've got a young family.
Mm,
But yeah, please do. And sometimes that can be one of the quickest, easiest levers to pull to make a change. If the doctor says, "Oh yeah, actually, you are really low on iron,"
mm.
you can start taking something, whereas some of the other stresses can take more time and support to think about how they're going to change. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, really good advice. Um, so I was just thinking about high functioning professionals. Maybe they have children, maybe they don't. Um, can you give us some perhaps examples of some burnout signs that a high functioning professional might go through?
I think sometimes cognitively there can be worries, escapism thoughts, like, I just wish I could get break my leg or catch COVID, or, you know, low end stuff up to suicidal thoughts. But, you know, escapism thoughts where I
Yeah.
just wish there's too much expected of me. It's all on me. I just wish something could happen that's beyond my control that would basically stop me being the go-to. I feel like that's definitely one. I think there can be fears of listening. I think a lot of people struggle to listen to their body and feel like it's almost like a weakness to tend to it and do what the body needs. That's a skill
Oh,
that we
good.
focus on in therapy. You're
Mm.
nodding your head because you
Yeah.
know. I do have a blog post on that. Maybe we should link it up.
Mm.
Um, we've been trained quite often to ignore the body. You
Yeah.
know, as kids, you know, you couldn't go to the toilet whenever you wanted. You had to wait for the breaks. And quite often now I'll be working, I'm like, when I get to the next, you know, sensible pausing point, even if I'm really hungry or stuff, I'll keep going. So that can be challenging. And I think people fear they're going to lose their edge if they do listen and do it. And I think that's a real, you know, that keeps pushing people forward. You know, who's just behind me ready to nab my job? What does it mean, or what does it look like to others if I set a boundary?
Yeah. And it's not getting any easier, is it, Claire? I don't think, it's still, even with all the modern technology that we have and all the resourcefulness, there's still that fear, like you see, of being, superseded or demoted or something like that. We're very dependent on our jobs as well. It can be it can be an imagined fear, but it can be a very real fear. And the thought of letting go or, taking care of yourself, it's sort of like you say, pushed right down to the bottom. And the
Yeah,
keeping going, I suppose, is adds to the burning feeling that they have to keep on
yeah.
going, they can't stop. Yeah.
Job security came up as one of the reasons for so much sick leave in the UK burnout report in January, particularly for younger people. And I think AI is adding to that now, isn't it?
Mm.
Like, you know, I might not even be pipped to the post by somebody younger and might more willing to work. It might just be another a computer.
Mm.
So yeah, tech is adding to it in different ways.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And the threat of it is there, isn't it? It's sort of there's lots of conversation about AI is going to take over the world, and it's all very threatening as well, and we're going to lose our jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, those sort of messages can actually activate the threat system, can't they, as well?
Mm.
And I think you talk a little bit about specific things that perhaps high functioning people might suffer from burnout as well. So perfectionism, people pleasing, and high standards. I think you mentioned those. Why would those in particular kind of more likely to cause burnout?
Yeah, so this is one of the internal pressures. So you come back to that weighing scale that I talked about earlier, and the kind of the demands outweighing the resources. If you've got internal demands, that can be in the way of the standards we're setting for ourselves. You know, it's not acceptable to stop when it's, you know, reach this level. It has to be, you know, double checked, triple checked. Well, that's adding extra layers of work, isn't it? If you're
Mm.
rereading emails or rereading everybody's emails in the team, you know, you have to find a way to work and delegate and trust. And that's something we you also have to hold risk then, because the risk might go up. But
Mm.
equally, the risk is higher if you are burned out and, you know, we start to drop balls and be less effective. So it's weighing up what's the right way forward for good well-being. And then, yeah, people pleasing is another internal pressure that we sometimes try and pick apart. You know, if someone has a tendency to put everyone else's needs before their own, again, that means we're not listening to our own needs, or the boundaries that are required. We don't think we deserve them, or can't cope. We haven't learnt the skills then to deal with the guilt that will show up when we start to put in boundaries. So what happens then is people misunderstand and misread the guilt as
Yeah.
something I need to tend to, and therefore, you know, avoid the commitment I made to my own self-care. So in therapy, we look a lot at, what does this emotion mean? Like, where does it come from? How valid is it that we listened to it on this occasion? And sometimes we have to bring that guilt along for the ride when we start to make boundary changes. And it might dig its heels in a little at first, because it's not used to not being listened to. But if you kind of keep doing that and you see the benefit, you know, you'll benefit, your family will benefit, because if you're, you know, if you're not setting those boundaries, something else is giving. If you say yes to this, you're saying no to something else. Usually that's yourself, or perhaps your kids at a time with your family, or your jog or whatever it is. So it's kind of, there's loads of work you can do around that, but yeah, and also an EMDR in terms of trauma therapy, and where I might go with this is sometimes looking at where those patterns come from, and if there's some earlier life traumas to tend to, maybe little t traumas where people pleasing felt like a survival skill, we might look at trying to process and update some of those stuck old patterns because they're playing out now and causing you extra problems. So we're not trying to say present day stressors aren't relevant, they might be, but if there's some ways in which you're interacting with the present day stressors that come from an old place, those are wounds we can tend to in therapy.
Excellent. And is it okay you just explain what little t is, because
Oh
people
yeah.
might not know what that is, and it's a great word, by the
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
So little t versus big T trauma we're referring to. A big T trauma is a traumatic event that everybody would look at and agree that was traumatic. So typically it might be a big world event like we're speaking at the moment, there's a war over in the Middle East, or an assault or a traffic accident, something like that. A little T trauma, in terms of what's happening in your body and nervous system, isn't necessarily different in that regard, but other people looking at it might not have noticed it was traumatic.
Okay.
You might have a different way of describing this, but for me, it might be like less necessarily life-threatening in the moment,
Mm.
but threatening in some level. Perhaps your sense of belonging to the group was threatened, or you were humiliated in front of others. I think humiliation is a big one that we see in therapy. Those stay with us. They might have been
Mm.
like, for the people in the room at the time, water off a duck's back, they didn't even bat an eyelid, but for you, that stayed with you. So for example, it might be the way you were laughed at
Mm.
by a group of kids when you walked into the room in a classroom, or being, looked at in a certain way by a parent in front of, the rest of your family when you said something that you thought they were going to be proud of and they weren't. Like, I've had moments like this and they stay with you. I've had also little T's at work that can stay with us, around being upset in a meeting, being minimized or gaslit by somebody, or being bullied by a boss. So, these, in terms, they're not little t in that they're not important, they're little t in terms of they weren't physically life-threatening.
Mm. Yeah, that's so well explained, Claire. And we all have those, don't we? We all have those, and it's so great and liberating that a person can come to you and think, yeah, these are the things that are still upsetting me as well, and actually can get those processed.
Yeah,
And perhaps because they're not life-threatening, they've minimized them, haven't they? They thought, oh, this is just I was just silly at the time. But actually, if you can
yeah,
free yourself from those things or those root causes, like you say, conflict is a great example. I hear a lot of people, I can't deal with conflict. I can't say no to that person, and that roots might go back to a time when they were humiliated or shouted at school or
yeah.
something like that, and that's why they people please and they can't deal with conflict. So yeah, that's a great point to make.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, okay, yeah, I think that it describes how we get into burnouts in the first place, especially if you have a really high demanding job. And obviously, as you said before, it's not just the demanding job; it's all the other demands that put up as well. You mentioned a little bit about attachment style and early relationship patterns. How might that sort of show up in stress or burnout?
So attachment refers to the bonds that we have with our primary caregivers, and
Yep.
how attuned they are and how well they meet our needs will impact on how we see our future attachments as well. So if we've got a secure attachment with our primary caregiver, meaning they made us feel safe and that our needs were relevant and important, we're more likely to reach out for help more easily and let them know when we're distressed. But also that helps us to understand our own emotions and regulate. Those are important life skills, but also go off and be curious and playful and explore. Um, so there are 4 different primary attachment styles, but insecure attachment, essentially in some way the primary caregiver hasn't been able to meet our needs in all those ways. So that might mean that in adulthood we become either hyper independent, so that avoidant attachment style where it's just easier if I do it myself because they might not see my needs or might minimize or might not think it's important. Therefore, or they were not consistent in being able to meet my needs or couldn't cope with my needs, and that made them too distressed. I'll be hyper independent. So what we see then in adulthood is then people don't let on when they're struggling, don't share what they're going through, don't reach out for help, or and just it's easier just to do it all myself. And then when someone is more anxious, you'll see more people pleasing, because you're trying to keep people on side, keep people close, keep people in your team, but you don't want to upset them. That feels too risky. And so these are, the biggest thing you can do with any any self-attachment kind of diagnoses, I guess, where you kind of think maybe I didn't have a secure attachment and still don't, is just to know that you can earn secure attachment in adulthood at any time. It's really important to stress that. You can choose to deliberately pursue that and be really intentional about where you're looking to build up that trust and attachment. And one of the key places you can intentionally do that's within your control from listening to this from day dot is your relationship with yourself, like how you tend to your own distress, how you speak to yourself, and because all this plays out in work, because if you're seeking those relationships in other places, in the wrong place, you might approach work in a way that is, in the long term unhealthy. Maybe it's okay for a short period of time, but in terms of having a fulfilling life of career, it's not going to be the way to fix that attachment wound.
Yeah, and that's really good. And the hope that you give people, because obviously as a therapist you hear so much about, people having very difficult childhoods and how that's still playing in their life. But to give the people hope that they can do something about that and they can learn those skills again is so amazing and so and I know you talk about it in your book as well, how to do that. And that gives people so much hope that they can actually change and they can have a better relationship with themselves and start there. They might not be able to control their boss, but they can control how they respond to their boss, and in a kind of
Yes.
compassionate way. Yeah,
Yes.
okay, yeah, that's really, really good. You also mention you mention a lot of things in your book, and we can't possibly cover everything in this podcast. So I'm just picking out the bits that I think are really very interesting. It's all very interesting, but particular bits. And I think you talk about the culture of productivity addiction, isn't it? That we're all we all must work hard now. We're driven, aren't we, to do this 24/7 work culture, aren't we? It's sort of part of who we are now. Would that be correct? Have I read that correctly?
Yeah. So I think we've got quite an individualistic culture, and the capitalist kind of ideals that are woven in around earning and our potential just all mean that our sense of self-worth is impacted if we're not providing and we've got outcome from our time. So you get into this pattern that you often see of people, if there's a transition point in their day or when they got time that maybe in the past might have been considered downtime, instead it feels like it needs to be constantly about self-improvement. So I need to be, listening to this important thing and learning a new skill, like you got your Duolingo or another self-improvement podcast. Obviously not putting your one in that category because yours is very important. So don't stop listening if you're walking and listening for that reason. But the important thing is to get a balance, like, because I definitely know some people in my personal life and work with people who, just don't read for pleasure anymore. They don't watch TV for pleasure. It's all about either documentaries or like something targeted, like a self-help or like fiction, a non-fiction book.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's kind of squeezing every moment of the day to be productive.
Yeah.
And we are rewarded for that as well, aren't we? Our
Yeah.
drive system is rewarded. If you think about, um, when we have the schooling system, you know, how well schools are doing and where they are on the league table is all about output and achievement. So it's really hard for us to kind of move away from that when it's woven in very invisible ways to our culture, to think that actually, pausing and going for a walk and noticing the flowers, and being present in the moment is important. But of course, there's so much there that is part of being human, is being connected and being present. That yeah, it's really tricky for us.
Mm. And it could be a sort of some sort of addiction, can't it, really? Because you just sort of get so used to being on the ball all the time that it feels strange to stop.
Yeah.
It's sort of, well, oh my God, well, my brain's,
Now what? Yeah. What do I do now? Or then feeling guilty, the guilty thoughts kick
yeah,
in. And also, I think it's helpful to consider, the dopamine that we get, which is the hormone designed to keep us pursuing a goal. Which is there because, our ancestors needed it to get on with the important goals of
yep,
hunting and that gathering and things, but of course now we've got such a constant stream of that. So if you're working and you're pinging off emails and they're coming back in and the Slack channel's going, and all of these things can be like little dopamine hits. When you choose to turn off your computer and stop, because it's been coming at you, you get a bit of a dopamine crash. And you see this with your kids when they come off their computers and they're like winning all
mm,
their games. And you're like, right, time to come off. It's dinner time. And they're not coming off. And you're like, right. And you go in, you just unplug it. They're like, they go a bit bonkers, don't they? Because they're having a
yep,
massive crash. So I've said to my kids now, like, I've got some strategies that I use. I join them, I listen, I see what they're doing, I talk to them, bring them back in gradually, kind of to orientate them into the present. And then explain that they're going to come off and it's going to be a transition that's tricky for them. And I do that for myself too, particularly when I'm working at home and there's no natural transition point where I'm traveling home, where I'm just discharging a little bit of that excess, you know, work hormones, the stress cortisol, like the
yeah,
dopamine. If I'm just literally upstairs and I'm going to go downstairs and connect with my kids, I have a transitional routine of doing shutting everything down, then doing a little bit of cleaning, just a little
mm,
bit of moving my body, because I know I'm getting urges to carry on my to-do list, but I also know that's just going to keep me stuck in that loop. And so I recognize that there's a bit of a crash there, but that when you recognize it's coming, you can ride it out more easily. Otherwise, you can misunderstand it as thinking, you get agitated. I need to be doing. You hang unhelpful thoughts about it, about what's happening and needing to carry on. Um, yeah, so I don't know if we can also link. I've got a 5 steps for switching
mm,
off after work, which talks to this point,
brilliant.
which people might find helpful if they're resonating.
Yes, if you put the link in the show notes, then people can access that. That sounds really
Great.
good. Yeah, excellent. And again, I think you're educating people so that they understand what's happening, the dopamine
Mm,
hits at work and everything like that, and suddenly that transition. And because I suppose, before we all used to sort of drive home and there was a little bit more of a transition, but now if people are working from home, they don't have that transition so much. So what you're saying is to understand it is step one, and then to
yeah.
put in some procedures for you so that you actually kind of withdraw gradually from that difference and actually give
Mm,
yourself the ability to wind down. Yeah, it's such a problem. It really is. I hear so many people have that problem. So it'd be really
mm.
useful to actually give out that handout. That'd be really great, Claire. Thank you for that. Okay. So you also mention people get tired and wired. That was an expression that you've used. I found that really interesting. It's sort of like maybe you're explaining it already, but could you just tell us a little bit more
Mm.
about what that means exactly?
Yeah, so it's that experience you get when you're lying in bed, desperate to try and go to sleep, but you're just also just buzzing. Do you ever get that sometimes?
Oh
So
yeah.
um I often get it if I sometimes do podcasts now with people in America, and they often need it to be quite late in the day. And I've had one the other day which was like 8:30 or 9 p.m. Right, late. I usually go to bed at 10:15. So I got off the podcast, and there's always a bit of energy from talking on a podcast, isn't there? Because you want to do a good job and be eloquent, and it's exciting to be talking to America.
Mhm.
And so yes, I know that trying to go straight into bed after something like that is just a false economy, because I will be like still going through all the questions that we talked about and what I said, and oh, I wish I'd said it like that. And so if you think about like your nervous system, like gears coming down the car, like you wouldn't come off the motorway
Mm.
in sixth gear and feel like going into a 20 mile per hour zone, putting your foot on the gas on the brake suddenly feels a bit clunky, doesn't it? And it
Mm.
feels like you've got that momentum still going forward. So think about, what do I need in order to come down my nervous system gears, in order to kind of begin to feel safe enough to switch off for the day. We do this for our kids. We have routines quite often when they're going to bed. We do that quite naturally, or we've learnt to, maybe a warm milky drink,
Mm.
a hot warm bath, a couple of books, a lullaby, all of this. Um, and the reason routine is so helpful is because it helps the child and the brain and the body to feel safe enough to be apart from us for 9 or 10 hours, which is a long time for a little child. It's great for us, but it's a long time for a little child. Um, and so, yeah, there's a misconception that basically we can fall asleep when we're tired enough. And that's not how it works. We need to feel safe enough. So
Yeah.
if you think about our ancestors, if they were out on the hunt, and it was, or they were being chased by a predator, if they were running and feeling tired, and if they just listened to that body cue of tiredness and lay down, that could have spelled their end.
Mm.
So we've developed that ability to delay rest until we get to a place of safety. But of course, now the modern day equivalent of that are the stresses pinging it at us, notifications, to-do list, the mental load in your head that you're always working through, especially worse if you're female. And so you've got to find a way to feel safe enough to rest without waiting to get to the end of your to-do list, because
Mm.
that's never going to happen. I've never reached the end of my to-do list. Have you?
Let's make another
Um,
one.
yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, that's important to hold in mind, that we need these routines to help us with that tired but wired feeling. And the more you crash from one thing to another during the day, the worse that is likely to be. So building in during the transition points in your day, like a little release valve, like after this meeting, that's a transition point. We can both pause and just check in, like, what does my body need? I've been sat still for an hour talking. I need to move my body a little bit. I've got some pent up energy in the top parts of my shoulders. I'm getting an urge to stretch. Even just doing it now feels good. So, I also fancy a cup of tea. Like all of that,
Mm.
quite often we don't build that into the day. There's no give. It's literally crashing from one thing to another, back to back. So, what could that look like if it's going and getting the kids from school? Maybe it is parking a block further and walking, so you can get back into like the mode for being there for the kids. Like, think
Mm.
about the transition points and how you can just eke them out a little longer and tend to your needs in that moment.
Mm. And that's something that people can do, just listening to you, that I can listen, I think that's doable, isn't it? I think sometimes people think that some of the solutions are quite complex and like you said, some of the patterns that we get ourselves into do need more work, but those sort of simple little practical routines that you can put into your life might be a game changer for certain people, mightn't it? Just knowing that, and then I can do something about that. Again, it gives that sense of agency and yeah, practical stuff that I can implement today. I can implement today.
Yeah, that's what
That's
I really
great.
want from these conversations. Like,
Mm.
interventions can be little tweaks, and it feels like you're cheating. That's not enough. Sometimes therapy is way more than that, but sometimes we start with the the entry level, like, because they can
Yes.
make a difference and can be the ones often that
Mm.
people stick at afterwards as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they feel that they're making some positive changes early on in therapy, that's such a great motivator to carry on attending, carry on working on those things, rather than perhaps a traditional role years ago when you had to go through all your past and understand all your childhood. Things have changed very much. Things are very, sort of research, evidence-based, and there's some lots of practical tips there
Mm.
that they can do. Okay, Claire, just have one last question for you. And what about organizations? Is there anything that you feel they can do? Sometimes they say they have this sort of wellness plan, but is it really a wellness plan? Is it just a sort of like a little bit of a, you know, saying that people, are there things that you think organizations could do better to actually care for um, its staff so that they don't go to the level of burnout?
Burnout is a systemic issue. It's really important to hold that in mind. So we're talking about mostly individual interventions and regulation, because that's empowering to know that you can take some control back and what you can focus on. But if anyone is listening who is in a position where they can make more systemic changes, then absolutely we need to think about that. It's got to come really from top down. I would love for all the leaders of our country to have some compassionate mind therapy training, leadership training. There is an intervention for that. If you are a leader, getting that for yourself and your other leaders and managers, because if you've got the theory, it's not about quick techniques. It's going to need to come from a framework that's consistent in everything you do. So that's why that's a tricky question to answer quickly, and also holding in mind I'm not an organizational
Mm,
psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I've definitely got lots of thoughts about that, but
mm,
kind of joined up intervention might need to come from someone
mm,
with that organizational models in place. But yeah, absolutely, it should be something that is happening in all places of work and conversations. I do go in and do workplace wellbeing talks and support teams to think about
oh,
how to what that might look like for a team. And it's so important that just carving that space out and thinking about what it looks like where you are, because each job has different pressures. Some are exposed to certain kind of vicarious traumas, or have jobs that they're not shown any appreciation because of the nature of their work. So like there's lots of different pressures that can be thought about, and what does actually supporting a nervous system safety look like in that environment will vary. But as a general rule of thumb, we need compassion, we need compassionate policies, we need listening, space to listen, we need people um, prioritizing that space and making sure check-ins aren't tokenistic or just about line management, but actually about like getting to know everybody. What do you need to do your role? People want to do well in their role. Like they don't want to feel like they're struggling. So making sure there's enough resources and money for people to feel resourced enough. That's really tough because we're in a culture of cuts right now. Um, so yeah, it's definitely something that's really important for companies to be thinking about and tending to.
And you make so many good points there, Claire. And I think, compassion focused therapy, people perhaps not have heard about that or know what
Right.
it is. Obviously, Paul Gilbert in the UK is a person, and I think he does do this organizational training. But actually, the irony of it is, if you have a clear mind, which is, you talk about your thinking brain being shut off when you have burnout. If you get your brain working again properly, it's actually better for the organization. So it's a bit of a win-win, isn't it? Rather than thinking
Yeah.
that everybody has to be sort of zoned out and everything like that. Once they understand the benefits, it is actually worth the investment, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
you get less staff turnover, you get more
absolutely.
productive people, you get people using their creativity in a way that benefits your projects. So I think, yeah, the upfront cost of time to set aside to learn techniques and to think about cultural change is the biggest challenge. But
Mm,
really, the research is all there to show the impact that it has when we are learning these skills for regulation,
mm,
for building compassion into the system.
mm. Absolutely. And I do highly recommend your book. I've enjoyed it immensely. So if people are interested in getting a copy, how do they purchase a copy from you, Claire?
I can share the web link on my website.
Yep, that'll be in the
Obviously,
show notes. That'll be in the
yeah,
show notes.
great. And obviously Amazon and Audible, Spotify, you can also get it on there if you've got a Spotify account. And also I'm on social media for anyone who would like to just get some like little bite-size snippets. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if people are interested in having therapy with you, they can just contact you direct and ask whether that's another possibility as
Oh
well.
yes, definitely should highlight that point. Yeah, that therapy is something I offer, and I run an associate practice called Plum Psychology. We're
Yeah.
all trained to work as trauma trained therapists in the models that I've described today. And an interesting intervention, I don't know if you offer this as well, Wendy, that we do that sometimes is quite appealing to busy professionals, which you've said a lot of people listening are EMDR intensives. Do you offer that? So if you want to deep dive into a theme that you think, maybe listening from this, like attachment trauma or a workplace bullying incident, but the idea of trying to find a weekly session is challenging,
Mm,
we can deep dive over the course of 3 or 4 days,
mm,
or half days, and they have lovely outcomes. They're really a special way of working.
mm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And like you say, for busy professionals, the thought of actually, having that
Yeah.
intensity and actually really feeling the difference outside could be an absolutely amazing thing for them as well. So yeah, very good point. Very good point mentioning that. That's really good.
Mm,
So thank you so much for being a guest. I really enjoyed our conversation.
me
And
too.
I hope that people listen and like and subscribe. And please get in touch with Claire and please read a book. I think you'll find it very, very interesting. Thank you so much for being a guest today, Claire.
You were a wonderful host. Thank you, Wendy.